Good morning, or whatever it is. Welcome to Housing Revolution and the plan to decommodify land and housing. Right now, there are millions and millions of people in the US tired of their housing and housing security being treated as nothing more than fodder for those with the means to build unearned, non-productive wealth, with sellers and landlords charging such high prices and rents that it's impossible for people to get ahead, that it's perpetually challenging to pay for other necessities, and that force millions and millions of citizens to work extra hours every week, time they could be spending with their families or keeping themselves healthy, or just having a little time to enjoy their good old American freedom. If you're watching this right now, there's a good chance that you are one of those people. If so, you're probably totally over a system that treats your shelter, a most essential of necessities, as nothing more than a labor-free way for investors to build more and more wealth without having to produce anything, without having to make a positive contribution to society, all on your back. You may well have reached that tipping point where you are ready to demand that this dysfunctional system be sent to its eternal resting place and be replaced with a highly functioning, equitable system that efficiently and affordably houses everyone. If so, you are not alone. The movement to decommodify land and housing is picking up more and more momentum every day, and sooner or later it will hit that point of no return where even the powers that be won't be able to stop it. And thanks to citizens coming together and demanding change, as we've seen several times in our country's past, this will go down in American history as the great housing rights movement, one of the pivotal movements that fundamentally and forever changed our country for the better and propelled us into a much brighter future. And the accompanying infrastructure program to create the supply of necessary and appropriate housing will go down as one of the greatest infrastructure feats in American history. So, how exactly do we decommodify housing? And how do we decommodify housing without decimating the economy? Our faux economy that's becoming less and less based on production and the provision of real services, and more precariously dependent upon financialization and non-productive income such as inflationary gains in rents? Well, we can't do it overnight. The time frame has got to be long enough to do it in a well thought out, orderly manner that won't lay waste to the economy, but short enough that it actually makes a difference in your life, in the lives of your loved ones, and the lives of your fellow citizens as quickly as possible. So my plan to decommodify housing is a 12-year plan. While that's a long enough period to avoid an economic Armageddon, the way I have it structured, housing will start lightening up as soon as the plan is passed, or even before then, because as the decommodify land and housing movement gains momentum, real estate investors and would-be real estate investors will begin refraining and even backing out. This in turn will stop the significant land and housing inflation that investors have caused by 1, decreasing demand, 2, increasing the supply of housing available to be purchased by owner-occupants, and 3, by decreasing the massive money supply available specifically to land and housing. Okay, so here's the plan, Stan. I call it the Affordable Housing Forever Act, or the AHFA for short. There are 2 phases, the 2-year initial prohibition followed by the 10-year disposition period. As soon as the plan goes into effect, the purchasing of land and or housing structures for investment purposes is forever banned. Housing units may only be purchased by owner-occupants. A buyer's former residence must go on the market within 6 months of the new purchase date and must be sold within 1 year of the new purchase date. The disposition period begins 2 years after the initial prohibition begins. At this point, any housing held as investment must be sold within 10 years at the rate of 10% per year of the aggregate value of one's housing holdings at the beginning of the disposition period, less the value of one's primary residence. Failure to meet these guidelines will result in fines to be assessed every year. And no, we're not talking about the piddly fines big corporations are very occasionally forced to pay for breaking laws. You know, those meaningless fines that are dwarfed by the extra profits these corporations made by breaking the law. No, we're talking about serious fines that will have a very negative effect on these investors' bottom lines. These fines will be calculated by the following equation. The disposition period, starting value or current value, whichever is less, of all non-primary residence holdings remaining above required sales times 10% of the disposition year. It almost sounds like something out of the IRS code, which, by the way, is much more effective than NyQuil. So let's say at the end of the first disposition year, an investor had only sold 7% of his or her land and housing holdings instead of the required 10%. Their fine would then be 10% of the value of the remaining 3% they failed to sell. However, if this had been the end of the second year, the fine would have been 20% of the remaining 3%. The third year, it would have been 30%, etc., etc. So let's say at the end of the fourth disposition year, an investor had only sold off 34% of their real estate holdings, missing the required 40% sell-off by 6%. Their fine would be 40% of the value of the remaining 6% they failed to sell, etc., etc. For those owning 9 housing units or less, the assessment of fines will begin according to the following decelerated schedule, with fines then accelerated in order to reach 100% by the 10th year. 8 to 9 units, fines will begin at the end of the second disposition year. 6 to 8 units at the end of the third disposition year. 4 to 5 units at the end of the fourth disposition year. 2 to 3 units at the end of the fifth disposition year. 1 unit at the end of the sixth disposition year. Multi-unit dwellings will be sold as individual units, paving the way for multi-unit co-ops. So yeah, instead of throwing your money away every month, you will be purchasing your apartment. You will have your foot in that elusive door. You will have the housing security. You will have the building of equity that our inequitable system enables landlords to rob from you. Yeah, no more of this turning 70 crap and having to pay most of your fixed income to the landlord every month, at least until they raise your rent so high or decide to renovate and force you out to somehow find a new place, quite possibly having to leave your friends and family behind to relocate to a less expensive place, which then displaces the local people already living there. Or, you can just go live in your car or some tent or something like that. So until cities have fulfilled their affordable housing requirements, secondary homes will be treated as investment units. And if you haven't figured this out yet, this plan prioritizes necessity over luxury. Once we get the necessities taken care of, then yeah, we can get back to luxury as long as it doesn't negatively impact necessity. To address inflation, sales prices of land and all existing homes will be limited to purchase price adjusted for general inflation plus fair market value of improvements less depreciation of improvements. Required down payments for existing home purchases will start off at 20% of purchase price, will increase 2% per year for 15 years, and will remain at 50% from there on. Mortgage terms will start out at a maximum of 25 years, will decrease by 1 year per year for 15 years, and will remain at a maximum of 10 years from there on. Upon passage of the AHFA, a moratorium on non-necessity housing construction loans will go into effect. This moratorium will be lifted for housing loans in cities that have met their affordable housing requirements. Yes, this is the only NIMBY-proof housing decommodification plan out there. Actually, I think it's the only housing decommodification plan out there. I hope I'm wrong. If you know of any others, please link to them in the comments below. The more we're talking about this, the better. So anyway, from there on, lending guidelines will be put into place that mandate funding of construction of necessary affordable housing to be determined yearly by a housing board. This housing board will be made up of proven housing advocates who have met housing advocacy qualifications and who are then elected by the people to represent 12 regions of the country, identical to the 12 Federal Reserve districts, serving 4-year terms and who are prohibited from taking money from donors. Campaign guidelines will go into effect ensuring all qualified candidates have equal media exposure. Because you just know CNN and Fox News and MSNBC will be so delighted about the decommodification of land and housing that each will be fighting to be the first to give these candidates free airtime. Right, Rupee? Yeah, or maybe we'll just have to overturn the Telecommunications Act of 1996 while we're at it. Either way, the election of housing board members will be corporation proof. The big corporations will no longer be able to hijack the democratic institution of our housing rights. This board will determine housing construction interest rates for different housing types, with necessity-based housing receiving the lowest rates and luxury-based housing receiving the highest rates. Our good friends at the Federal Open Market Committee will relinquish to the AHFA Housing Board the duties of setting interest rates and determining availability of money and credit for any and all land and housing purchases. To address supply, the federal government will undertake construction of new, necessity-based, energy-efficient, non-toxic, weather and disaster-resistant homes that meet UN guidelines for dignified housing. The smallest sustenance units will house those who can't support themselves and would otherwise be homeless. Successively larger units will be available to those who qualify, with the smallest units prioritized to the lowest income earners. Prices will be based on cost, mortgages will be held by the federal government, and rates will be determined by the new AHFA Housing Board. These homes will be forever prohibited from being used to secure a loan for anything other than the purchase of the home itself. For those who fall behind on mortgage payments, suitable work programs will be offered. As a last resort, an occupant may be moved to a smaller, economically feasible unit. However, an occupant can never be evicted unless a smaller or sustenance model is available to them. So there you have the basic foundational blueprint for the Affordable Housing Forever Act. Effectively and comprehensively addressing the major points listed above is requisite to once and for all addressing the perpetual dysfunction of our current land and housing system. In addition, many other factors also need to be effectively addressed, and many details obviously need to be worked out. These aspects should not be left solely to politicians. It is crucial that all of us contemplate, brainstorm, and engage in civilized intellectual debate in order to identify and effectively address these other factors and details. And that means you. So a couple of other notes. If the inflation provisions of this plan were lost on you, check out my videos about money supply and inflation. Understanding basic economic concepts is crucial to recognizing the tools of economic control and subjugation we average everyday citizens are constantly being subjected to. Secondly, the perpetual affordable housing crisis web of negative effects isn't limited to only the homeless or to those burdened with excessive housing costs or to those unnecessarily precluded from home ownership and the housing security and building of equity that come with it. Check out my video, 10 Reasons We Need a Housing Revolution, to get an understanding of the wide swath of damage our dysfunctional land and housing system is causing our economy as a whole, that it's doing to our ability to bring innovation to market, to our ability to compete as a global producer, and how it's stifling small businesses, and how it's crushing the ethos of we the people. Also, this act is a plan of implementation and must be preceded by a constitutional amendment banning land and housing investments if we don't want it to forever get caught up in our corporation hijacked court system. As our current land and housing system is nowhere even remotely aligned with the founders' vision for our country, but is in fact very closely aligned with the feudalism the founders were determined to prevent, this is very doable. Go to my YouTube channel and watch Feudalism and the Founding Fathers' Big Conflict for more insights. Also, as the general population starts to comprehend the wide swath of damage our current land and housing system is and has long been doing to our economy and our country as a whole, the monumental, once in a few generations energy required to pass an amendment to the U.S. Constitution will be present. So all right, fellow citizens, American history books are waiting for we the people to write the new unit on the great housing rights movement. So put your boots on, set your sights high, and get ready to rumble. Like, share, subscribe, blah, 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 blah. But most importantly, discuss, debate, brainstorm, and take this vital conversation to the next level. As the decommodify land and housing movement becomes loud enough, unified enough, effectively communicates its vision with the masses, and proves its unyielding determination, things will begin shifting for all of us. All right, over and out.